Welcome back to another edition. And I'm pretty excited to have Vessy Tasheva. And she's based in Dublin, Ireland, trained in psychoanalysis. Is that right, Vessy?
Yeah, psychoanalytic therapy. Yeah.
Um, and she graduated from Trinity College in Dublin. But I think one thing really interesting about your background, Vessy, is your involvement in um, business and finance as a COO, a CSO, I think a CMO in startup companies or very.
Over the last 15 years, I've been in various commercial roles. I also work in corporate and in advertising, but yeah, various roles in tech startups, as you mentioned, like CEO, CSO, CMO, a lot of the C's. And this is where kind of financial therapy found me. I was pursuing psychoanalytic psychotherapy and doing business coaching for entrepreneurs and freelancers. The topic kept going to like, what their emotional connection to money was. So business coaching was becoming financial therapy very organically. So it was calling me in a way. And that's how after I became a fully qualified psychoanalytic psychotherapist, I decided to also join the Financial Therapy Association as a member and then pursue certification as a financial therapist.
So that's a really interesting path, and um, really combines that love of business and money and how that operates with the emotions of
Mm.
it. And your practice today, is it solely on financial therapy or a little combination of both, or how does that look?
Yeah, I keep them separate in the sense that so psychoanalytic psychotherapy, I only practice in person. I have a private practice in the heart of Dublin, in Dublin too, not far off from where we met. And psychoanalytic, well, and then the financial therapy piece, it's mostly online. Both I practice in English and in Bulgarian. And with financial therapy, it's kind of it's quite different from psychoanalytic psychotherapy in the sense that the boundaries are a bit different and it tends to be more short term. With psychoanalytic psychotherapy, it wouldn't be a surprise if you have a client who's with you for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years. In financial therapy, and you and I chat about that over coffee, usually, people who are maybe with you for a few months, half a year, maybe a couple of years, maybe a bit longer, but it wouldn't be typical to have someone, for 10 years. In psychoanalytic psychotherapy, we have clients who come once a week and some that are twice a week. So I work with both type of clients. In financial therapy, that would be a bit of a stretch to see someone twice a week. I was once a week would be plenty.
Would Do you find the uh, any difference in the frequency of meetings with financial player therapy or psychotherapy? Now, I mean, you just said that psychotherapy you could meet twice a week. That would be
Mm.
unusual with financial therapy. But do you find the frequency of meetings is just as important with financial therapy or different from psychotherapy?
Um, so in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, you definitely need to see each other at least once a week. Um, Otherwise, you just spend your time catching up with on like what has happened.
Hmm.
Um, there is a lot of the narrative, this happened and that happened. Um, that's even the case when you go to therapy once a week. When you go twice a week, what ends up happening is, say your first session is on Tuesday and the second one is on Wednesday. On the Tuesday, you're probably still sharing a lot of, And then, then I had this conversation, or this is what happened, and etc., etc. And on the next day, on the Wednesday, there isn't just that much that happened in the last 24 hours in most cases. And that allows to go much deeper. With financial therapy, I see the reflection piece requiring time, and sometimes people are new to it in a different way. We do some journaling with some clients on their thoughts related to money, just as they're spending through the week or the month. In that sense, the reflections can be coming a bit slower, I feel sometimes. So if we don't meet every week, but they have a preference every other week or even once a month, I feel that still works. In psychoanalytic psychotherapy, you really need to go in the work to fully immerse yourself and stay in it regularly. The feeling is very different, and we work a lot with, so my training is in object relations, so that's even more specific within psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And there we work with free associations and dream analysis. We focus on current challenges and past experiences that people have. But there is a lot happening in the transference and counter transference. So a lot of work is unconscious. We like to say two unconsciousness meet in a room. So a lot of the work is not cognitive in that sense.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've never given this a lot of thought. I think most therapists, financial therapists, are accustomed to the catching up
Mm.
and how that time can oftentimes use a large portion of the session.
Mm.
Um, and I've never really considered that if you had two sessions, one day, one the next day, how there's not a lot more to say, and that could allow going deeper. Um, so that's really interesting to me. Um, and I suspect that there could be some application even to financial therapy when we're avoiding. I know when I can tend to be talking in my therapy sessions and doing the catch up, there can be a part of me that's saying, if I can talk long enough, I don't have to look at this,
Mm.
whatever this is.
Yeah. Well, a lot
Uh,
of the insight in a session comes at the end. When people are almost like, oh, and by the way, this happened, just about to leave the room. And that's why it's great to have the second session. Now, when I do financial therapy, I like to do a couple of exercises. One of them is we talk about their earliest memory related to money. And that could be quite symbolic and formative of their object relations when it comes to money. Um, and then the other one is looking at their family tree and then what memories are related to that. Now, even within the Financial Therapy Association, I see different professionals are covering maybe like a different range of services. I don't do any of the financial education, any of the financial advisory, like I'm not a financial coach. So, if they say, this is how much I want to save, or I want to invest more, I don't touch on that. We only work on the emotional piece. If they want a financial planner or educator or advisor or an accountant, then I put them in touch with someone in my network. So I stay within the emotional therapeutic space. So
you,
when you look at the family piece and those like early memories, I would say I still have a kind of a psychoanalytic approach to it. That's definitely there, but it is a bit more cognitive. Like in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, we wouldn't be saying, hey, you should have a journal, or here is an exercise that you do, or like take notes about this. We don't do any of that. We don't have an agenda for the session. We don't follow up on, okay, last time we talked about A, B, and C. Now we're going to talk about, you know, the same, or, it's very different. So what free association means is when someone starts a session, um, we don't even say hi. Maybe they come in and they say hi and I'll nod, but and maybe I'll say hi back. But the idea is the person gets to talk whatever comes up to their mind. And that is free association. And that's already communicating what's on top of their mind, even maybe unconsciously. And you could have people that make, a list of topics that they want to cover in a session, or a list of things that they want to work on in general. What's important is what they actually bring up, not what's on the list. And they might even send you a text message like, these are all the 10 things. That's the cognitive piece. Where the real work happens is when they come in, do they start talking about something completely different that they might even think is not important, but there is something really important. That's why it came to the surface.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And is there any relationship between that type of uh, therapy or worldview of therapy and financial therapy? I mean, you've said financial therapy is quite different, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there's any crossover there. And part of that is when I was trained in IFS. I it's very much following the client and no theme.
Yeah.
And I thought, how can this possibly be tied to financial therapy where there is an agenda? The agenda is financial well-being, and can it be effective? And I found out that it could be. And I'm just really curious about, is there any crossover in those modalities?
Mm. They can be. I wouldn't say it's in a very rigid way. It's I'll give you an example. So my Master of Science dissertation for Trinity College Dublin was um, on the topic of early experiences, more around the topic of like how people shape their sense of self, as in true self or false self. True self being who we truly are within ourselves, and if we have even had a chance to develop that. And false self would be maybe what others expect of us, and then we're leaving a persona in a sense. And maybe we haven't been in touch with the true self. But the focus of the dissertation, something that everyone found unique, was even though I am trained to work with adults, I focused on the fetal experience, so the fetus during the pregnancy, through birth, and then up to 6 months after birth. So that was my definition of early experiences of trust and how they shape the adult sense of self. And then, the adult is anyone over 25 or over 30, depending on the most recent findings in neuroscience and the definition of adulthood. Um, so it was really interesting, and to my surprise, that our very first experiences, just as I was researching on the topic, were sensory, and they were through the skin. So it's extremely early that we start to have those experiences. It's around so essentially the embryonic epidermal development begins at 5 weeks of pregnancy. So that's the third week after fertilization. And this is when the skin ego begins to develop. And so we have a very bodily memory. That's not something we can recall. and then continues to be the case. All of these pre-verbal experiences are internalized and they shape us, and we have no knowing of that. This is where the unconscious piece is so important, because we're not like, oh, someone talked bad about me when I was 3 months old, or I
Mhm.
overheard my parents say this when I was 2 months into my fetal experience development. But those things leave a very deep imprints. And so the skin piece is what surprised me. And so looking at the fetal experience, the birth, and up to 6 months, the first 6 months of life, and where I find a very strong parallel, it's between the role of the skin and the role of money in one's life. So in my dissertation, we were looking at, what is the definition of trust? And it can be the parental consistency, reliability, love, which is a scary term in psychoanalysis because it's not defined. Um, so there are different aspects that make a parent trustworthy, and then you internalize that trust. So there is a very strong relationship between trusting others and trusting oneself. Again, this starts at the beginning of the pregnancy as a process. Um, then the skin carries that relationship with self and other, and as a barrier between self and other. And the role of the skin can be to communicate. It can be to separate. It can be a boundary. It can be a container. So imagine someone who has some kind of chronic condition, a skin condition. Now that can communicate, I need love, I need affection, or it can communicate anger, or it can communicate a leaky boundary so they don't feel contained. Or people who, let's say, build up, like, let's say, obsessively go to the gym, and that becomes their muscles become their second skin, in a sense. There are many things that can act as a second skin, as a pseudo container. Money can have all of these functions. So you can overspend or underspend, and that can have its meaning. You can have, let's say, a flashy car. And that can communicate, maybe you're anxious when it comes to affection, or you're avoidant when it comes to affection, or there can be the self-worth piece. So self-trust and trusting others is a lot about your confidence in yourself, your self-worth, and money is directly tied into that. So if you have self and others as the two kind of major pieces, then what's in the middle is skin and money. So that's where the transaction or the interaction, and it's not to say every interaction is transactional, right? But some people can feel like for an interaction to happen, it has to be transactional.
Mhm.
For example, maybe you need to be a very wealthy man for women to notice you. So you're only worthy of affection, of love, of attention if you have money. Or it could be a sense of fusion. Let's say there could be kind of like a narrative, unless we have a shared account, or let's say unless all of the money that we have is shared, then it's not true love.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different ways that a couple can manage their finances. It's not to say there is a right or wrong way. And when I work as a financial therapist, that's what I remind people. It's not about whether you had good or bad experiences. We're not doing that kind of splitting. It's more about you had certain experiences, they shaped your relationship with money. And is that relationship with money useful to what you're trying to accomplish? So do you have an emotional connection to money that's constructive and healthy and works for you? And, are you happy? And what's interesting is even though people come to talk about those financial maybe objectives and then how they're shaped by their emotional connection to money, um, we always we end up talking about those relationships in their early childhood, the trust that was built or was lacking, or how it was jeopardized, etc., and then how it impacts their relationship today. So in a way, that's where they come for financial therapy, and it becomes quite psychoanalytic, object relations, because it ends up about affection, and they cannot fix, or fix, broadly speaking, they cannot work or change the emotional connection unless we go into the relational piece.
I I'm smiling because it's like, oh, it's not about the money.
It's not about money. But I love what you say in your podcast. 90% of decisions are emotional, and that's the fact. Because think about it: if financial education and financial advisory on its own was working, you would just read all of this information once. You wouldn't even pay an expert or a coach or any of that. You just sit and you will do it exactly. You will do it that correct way. And there is no correct way because we have different emotional needs. Like, for example, in your podcast episode, when you were talking about why you should have like a coffee machine at home instead of buying a coffee, I do have a coffee machine at home. And I know exactly what I'm getting emotionally out of getting a coffee out. And I do have maybe what's the ROI on that? Am I just spending, or does it have an emotional purpose that just making my own coffee would not be met? And that is, so just even having that awareness rather than black and white, what are the numbers?
Yeah, and there's so much here, and thank you for getting into the relationship and function of the skin, because that was so fascinating to me. I think that was somewhere around our parting words. Money's like skin, and I'm like, what? And so I get that between self, me, and others, that difference that contains that defines me is skin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm fascinated with the prenatal issues in doing a lot of experiential group therapy, psychodrama, things like that. I've seen how they have dealt with those, some of the prenatal. I don't even know that you could call them memories, but the
So
sensations.
they're I think it's easier to explain to people when you say a memory. It's a bodily stored memory. But if you're thinking of as a memory as something you can recall and be like, oh, and this is what happened on Tuesday, it's not that. It's information, it's sensory information that is stored in your body. And it gets recalled randomly by external factors. Something reminds you of that. And sometimes it's like temperature or a situation. And but it's interesting, isn't it? Like, how do early experiences of money shape the adult sense of self? How do early experiences of trust, that early into one's development, shape the adult sense of money? These things influence each other. They're almost, it's like a formula where the self and the other and are the only constants. And whether it's skin or money or love or trust, it's actually the same thing on that relational level.
So I'm curious, and I know we're almost out of time. What What are the techniques, or how do you deal with a client, especially let's say a financial therapy client, around those prenatal experiences?
Mhm.
Um, is that um, I, I can see in my mind's eye of how that might be done in a group or in group therapy. How is that done in one-on-one?
It, it, there isn't like, step one is you do this and then two. It's it it can play out in many ways. First, you don't know if something is coming up that's from during the pregnancy or when they were 2 years old or 20. You might not know. You might feel the kind of the severity of it. You could feel that it's a very primitive anxiety, and that would indicate that it's preverbal. Um, you might know their birth story, and maybe it was very traumatic, or you might know that, I don't know, one of the parents experienced something during the pregnancy. These things can be informative in one way. They can explain why you observe and you feel in the session what they're talking about. But what those like factual bits are secondary. What's important is how they what they experienced, what it meant to them, how they internalized it, and then how you feel that in the transference. um, and sometimes it could be so let's say you have a client that leaves you feeling disgusted. That doesn't mean you're a bad therapist and you're thinking you have a like let's say a client you're disgusted of, or a client that you're angry at. What they're trying to show you unconsciously is what it feels like to be them. So that's where the work begins. And um, and this is where also supervision comes in very helpful, and going to personal therapy as a therapist to know what's yours and what's theirs, what's what is coming unconsciously in the work from them, maybe what's being projected, what they're putting in you, and you're containing that or helping them digest that and kind of return it in a digested form. And what are things that are just being brought up for you from your own life and maybe stuff you haven't worked on, and then you can work on that in personal therapy. Um, so it's not a structured process, but the majority of it boils down to establishing trust, and then gradually that trust being internalized. How it translates into money, it could be that there are different defenses or forms of acting out related to money. And then it's very much about the boundaries that are being held around money, um, and and different how different situations play out. And someone can say, "Oh no, I just forgot to pay," and they just forgot to pay, but also maybe they're testing, your love and affection for them. Are they worthy if they're not paying? Will you still be there next week? A lot of those. So it's about trust. Yes, you will still be there at, I don't know, 3 p.m. on a Thursday, because that's when you meet every week. And gradually, and that's why it takes months and years. That is eventually internalized that you're reliable. And then it becomes tricky when you go on a break, like a 2 week break, or like a summer break that might be a bit longer. That can be very challenging. So is it a breach of trust? Do we have rupture? And then can we repair again the trust? And it's really interesting to see how it can manifest, and it's very unique.
Vessy, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you, I think, in Austin.
I hope so, yeah.
Thank you again.